Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, this is At the Helm Sports. I'm your host, Derek Helm. Thank you for joining me for episode 148. Please be sure to follow and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Leave those 5-star reviews if you're watching on YouTube. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and in the comments section, let me know, who do you think will be the highest scoring tight end this week? Because it looks like tight end is going to be a disaster again. So interesting who's going to be up there at the top. I don't know. I mean, there's a couple guys that have stood out at the tight end position, but overall, it's been an absolute disaster. So, think it could be an interesting week as far as tight ends go. But we're not just here to talk about tight ends. We're going to dive into everything. I'm going to dive into the Sunday slate, go game by game. Obviously, this is more from a betting and DFS perspective. But if you are looking for season long fantasy advice, we'll be going through each game here. So the information will definitely be actionable there. But we got 12 games to get to, so we might as well dive right into it. The first of which is New York Giants at Cleveland. Now, there are a lot of games that are ugly with low totals, and this is definitely one of them. Cleveland is favored by 6 at home. Now, the Giants obviously still don't have a kicker at this point, so that's going to be interesting. They're definitely going to have to figure that out. Obviously, it's kind of hard to score 3 touchdowns when the other team doesn't score any and still lose, but they figured out a way to do it last week. The total for this game is 38.5, so really not expecting a ton of scoring overall in this one, and for good reason. I just both quarterbacks have not played well so far to this point. Daniel Jones bounced back a little bit last week, but a lot of that was probably the Washington defense. So, not really sure I want to go there. You can definitely make a case for Neighbors. 6,400 though, the price is getting slightly elevated, but he is a stud, and you can make the case that even though 6,400 is a little more expensive than what he has been, it's probably still cheap for what he offers. I'm really not sure that I'm going to go to much in this game, though. Devin Singletary is 5,700 with the amount of work he gets. Maybe he's a cheap running back piece that you could use. As far as the running backs on the Cleveland side go, I don't think you can really trust anyone. We saw Foreman get the bulk of the work last week at 4,400. I don't really know if you can trust that he's going to be the guy this week because it could go back to Jerome Ford, but at 5,800, you really can't trust him. Do you really want to trust Deshaun Watson at all? Because obviously he hasn't looked good this year. Looked a little bit better last week, but I'm probably not going there. I will make a case that maybe Amari Cooper at 6,100 in large field GPPs could make a sense. It's just he's getting a ton of targets. They're not great targets because Watson isn't really playing well, but you would have to think at some point those targets will definitely turn into production. So really, those would be the only guys I would even consider in this game from a DFS standpoint. From a betting standpoint, not really trusting either side. 6 points seems like the right line. Now, Cleveland should cover it considering they're at home and the defense is good enough, but I don't think that I would trust going the other way and trusting Daniel Jones to cover 6 points on the road. So if we move on to Chicago and Indy, this one could be interesting. Now, obviously, Chicago's offense has looked inept through 2 games, but this total is a little higher than the last one, 43.5, with Indy being 1 point favorites at home. I kind of like Indy there taking the 1 point, or even if you just wanted to take a money line, I think that would be fine. I do think at home here, I think that they play well. Anthony Richardson, 6,700. I think you can make a case to go to him in DraftKings. Obviously, it's going to be up and down for him. He's going to take deep shots. He's going to try and run the ball a lot. So that's what we want from a fantasy standpoint for fantasy scoring. And I do think he will have weeks where he finishes up there as the top 3 quarterback. So in the dome at home, I definitely think you can make a case for it in this one. Now, Chicago's defense has looked good, but obviously we saw Stroud have some success last week and Nico Collins. So if I was playing Richardson, I don't know that I necessarily want to trust any of these wide receivers here. You just don't know who it's going to be, and the volume really isn't that great that I don't necessarily think you have to pair him with anyone. So it would probably just be Anthony Richardson for me on the Colts side. Obviously, you can always make a case for Jonathan Taylor, but 7,300 price is a little bit elevated. He's not really going to catch a lot of passes, which kind of hurts the upside there and a little bit of the floor. He is still a very talented back, but I don't necessarily know if I want to go there. On the Bears side, as I said, just haven't looked good. Indy's defense isn't incredible, but I don't know if I really would want to play Caleb Williams, and Swift has looked absolutely terrible, so I don't think you can trust him at all. DJ Moore, I'm intrigued by a little bit, 6,700. Just he should be the focal point of this offense. We do know he has some big play upside, so $6,700 on DraftKings. I don't think anybody goes there. So if you're looking for a sneaky piece here, if you wanted to go with a skinny stack, maybe Anthony Richardson and bring it back with a DJ Moore, I do think that that could potentially make a little bit of sense, but that's probably really all I'm looking at in this game. As I said, a lot of these games are ugly, and some of them might even steer away from completely. But next we have Houston at Minnesota. Now, this game could be interesting. Houston laying 2.5 points on the road. I think that in itself is interesting. I do actually have a little bit of interest in potentially betting the Vikings if that number gets to three and they're getting three at home. I think you can make a case for it. And the total here is 46. So we are expecting a little bit of scoring, but I think the Vikings are the real deal. Now, obviously, putting money behind Sam Darnold is a little bit sketchy. Houston's defense has looked good, but I think they're a well coached team. I think they have plenty of offensive weapons, and I think that this is a very talented defense as well. They were good last year and have looked good through two games here. Granted, they haven't really played the greatest teams in the Giants, and obviously the Niners were coming off of a short week, so maybe that's partially to blame. But regardless, the Vikings defense shut them down last week, so I do think you can make a case that that defense shows up, and maybe Houston can't really get as much going, especially if Joe Mixon can't go. Now, if Mixon doesn't go, still don't know if Damian Pierce is going to be able to go. So potentially we could get Cam Akers here at 4,700 with this backfield to himself. So I definitely think that that's intriguing. Uh, but if Mixon does go 6,900, I'm probably not really interested there. It would more so be in the Stroud side. And people are probably going to chase the Nico Collins. 7,300 is a pretty high price tag for him, but he looked like the true alpha of this team. So I definitely think that if you're going to play a pass catcher from Houston, it's probably him. Now he also has a Q tag at the moment also, but he should probably be able to go. I really don't necessarily want to trust Diggs. I do think similar to week 1, there will be weeks where he is their best receiver. Maybe he does catch 2 touchdowns here or there, but the overall volume for him, I don't think is going to be there. And I do trust Nico a little bit more. Tank Dell at 5,200, I think, is actually a great price. He's still being involved. They're getting him the ball. They're trying to get the ball in his hands with the reverses. Obviously, last week he almost got hit in the face by the ball. It looked like he kind of lost it in the lights and it kind of just went over his head a little bit. But if he catches that ball, he's probably easily scoring a 50-yard touchdown on that play. And of course, that would have got his yardage over for me that I bet instead of the -3 yards that he ended up with. But if he scores that touchdown, I think we are making a very different case here for Tank Dell. I think he is actually a great play this week at 5,200, whether you want to pair him with someone on the Viking side or with Stroud or just play him straight up. I do like Tank Dell quite a bit. As far as the Vikings go, I don't know that I want to play Darnold, but at 5,500, it is interesting because a lot of the pay up options at quarterback are intriguing this week. So maybe paying down for a Darnold would make some sense. Got to keep an eye on Aaron Jones. He also has a Q tag. Really, I mean, this game has a lot of potential injuries that we're going to have to keep an eye on here. So if he couldn't go, Ty Chandler could be a sneaky little play at 5,300. Justin Jefferson, little banged up, but they said he should be good to go. 8,600 for him, I think is obviously an elevated price tag, but it's Justin Jefferson. We know what he is capable of. So if you did want to pair Darnold with him and then bring it back with Tank Dell, Dell gives you a little bit of savings with the Darnold savings. I don't think that's a crazy stack. Jalen Naylor has actually looked pretty good. Addison is probably still going to miss this game. Naylor at only 4,400. The volume really hasn't been there. It's mainly been touchdowns, so it's kind of hard to rely on that. But he's looked good. He looks talented, and I think you can make a case for it, especially if you are stacking this game. But that's basically all I'll be looking at in this one. Then we have Philly at New Orleans. Now, this is an interesting game as well. Just Philly obviously coming off of the loss on Monday night. I do think that that has them deflated a little bit on a short week, heading to New Orleans, who has looked like the hottest team in football so far. I get why the line is 2.5, but if Saquon Barkley catches that ball and the Eagles go on to win, you can make a case that the Eagles are actually favored in this game. So if somehow it does get to 3 points, I might take a chance and bet the Eagles at +3. I do still think, and maybe this is my priors coming into the season, that they are more of a talented team than the Saints are. Now, obviously, with AJ Brown, that does hamper them a little bit, but I still think that they have the firepower on offense to keep up. The defense has not looked good at all, so maybe that is the issue there. But total is 49.5, and for good reason. I mean, New Orleans has looked unstoppable on offense. Credit to Kubiak and them running motion. I'm sure you've heard that a million times at this point, but I still do trust Philly a bit here on the road, and I definitely will be playing a bunch of them in DraftKings. It's with AJ Brown out, it's a little bit more consolidated. So if you wanted to pay up for Hurts at 7,300, I don't think that he's necessarily going to be the pay up option. A lot of people will probably rather play Lamar or Kyler. So I do like Hurts here. Obviously, what he provides with the rushing, and then you know exactly who to pair him with. With AJ Brown out, it's Devontae Smith. 6,900 is probably too cheap for what Devontae Smith is with no AJ Brown in this offense. So should see consolidated targets there. Definitely like that. I'm not chasing Covey or Dotson. I don't really like Goddard either. He's not playing 100% of the snaps. Calcaterra was playing a little bit on Monday night as well. So maybe you can make a case for Goddard in Hurt stacks and hope that he gets there. But I think it's kind of hard to trust. And then Saquon Barkley at 7,700. Obviously, with the way he's looked so far this year, I definitely think the usage is there. He has a safe floor. He has a great ceiling. So 7,700, I do like Barkley quite a bit as well. Obviously, the Saints are a little bit more susceptible through the air than they are on the ground, but I think Barkley is talented enough that you don't necessarily have to worry about that. And Barkley could actually be a pivot off of what should be a pretty chalky Kamara. Obviously, people are going to chase what we saw last week with Kamara, but also this Eagles defense has not looked good at all. So I think that's just even more so the reason why people will play Kamara at 7,500. And I think Derek Carr stacks are going to be pretty popular here as well. At only 5,800 after what we've seen over the first 2 weeks, I definitely think that it makes sense. And again, this Eagles defense has been absolutely horrific through 2 games. So I think you can make a case of Carr to Olave at 6,300, Carr to Shaheed at 5,300, or even if you wanted to go Carr, Olave, and Shaheed, that could make some sense here. So I like Olave quite a bit here. I think even if you wanted to get a piece of this game and the high total, if you wanted to go Hertz naked and just bring it back with Olave, that could make a little bit of sense. If you wanted to go Devontae Smith, bring it back with Olave, that's fine. Or Smith with Shaheed also, because I do think Shaheed is, we've seen him be a boom bust player over the past couple years, but he definitely is a lot more involved in this offense this year. And I do think we will see more boom than we do bust. So I do like that quite a bit. Now, if you're playing skinny stacks, Kamara, Devontae Smith gets a little expensive. If you're stacking this game and you're going Hurts, Devontae, Kamara, that's really expensive. So I do think that that stack in itself maybe goes a little bit under owned. So it's just something to keep in mind there, but it does eat up a lot of your salary. So probably don't want to allocate too many of your lineups to that combination. Next, we have the Chargers at the Steelers. 35.5 is the total here. Pittsburgh is 1.5 point favorites at home. Don't really like a lot in this one. This one's going to be really quick. I just Justin Fields hasn't really been running as much as we've seen in the past. The running backs on the Steelers are a disaster. J.K. Dobbins has obviously looked good for the Chargers. 6,400 though is a little bit elevated of a price tag. He's been effective, but he's not getting the full workload. They're still using Gus Edwards quite a bit. It's been long runs, and that definitely is part of Dobbins' game, but I don't know that you're going to be able to rely on it every single week. So at 6,400, maybe the price tag keeps people away a little bit. But this Steelers defense is no joke, also. So if I'm looking at anything in this game, it's probably the defenses because they're both pretty strong. And actually, now that I'm saying it out loud, I don't even know if I'm going to go to the defenses because I could see both of these teams just coming out here and running the ball, and you're not going to get a lot of opportunities for sacks. You're not going to get a lot of opportunities for turnovers, and it's probably going to be over pretty quickly. So honestly, for me, this game is pretty much a stay away. So next we have Denver at Tampa Bay. Now, this is another disgusting one. 40 is the total. So not expecting a lot of points. Tampa Bay laying 6.5 at home. Obviously, that makes sense. Denver has been completely inept on the offensive side of the ball. So probably can't trust Bo Nix or any of these guys. On the Tampa side, you can definitely make a case for playing some of these guys. Baker Mayfield has looked great. 6,300 price is going up a little bit, but if you wanted to pair him with Godwin, I think that makes sense at 6,500. Sertan should be on Evans, so maybe that keeps people off of him. And he's $700 more than Godwin, so most people will probably play Godwin. And then if they're playing Baker, probably pairing him with Godwin. So Evans definitely probably makes a contrarian play here. And if you wanted to just play Evans in large field GPPs and just that's your exposure to this game, I think it would be a sneaky way to get exposure to this game. And at $7,200, I don't see him being very popular. Next, we have Green Bay at Tennessee. Another game. 36.5 is the total. Absolutely disgusting. Tennessee, 3 point favorites at home. Levis has not looked good. Obviously, Willis is not too great himself. Josh Jacobs might be the only person I'm considering even playing in this game. He's going to get the ball a ton. So Tennessee's defense has looked pretty good though so far. So I don't know. This game is very hard to swallow if you're thinking of playing anyone. Jacobs at 6,700 is a good price tag. He should get the bulk of the work. They're gonna want to run the ball, and he definitely has some upside there. Jaden Reed questionable right now. Excuse me. Yawning in the middle of a podcast. That's great. Anyways, 5,900 for Jaden Reed. I do think that he's involved enough and has a little bit of upside. Maybe you can make a case for him. I'm not chasing the Calvin Ridley fluke 2 touchdown game. Maybe Pollard would be the only one at 6,000, especially if Spears is out. He should have the whole workload to himself, but maybe that makes him a little bit more popular. But Pollard at 6,000 would be the only player that I'd really be looking to play from the Tennessee side. Now we move into the 5 late games. Yeah, last week we had 10 early games and 3 late games, and now we have 5 late games. I don't know what the hell they're doing here. It's I'd rather it spread out like this, but last week was just absolute chaos in the 1 o'clock slate. So we get it spread out here, and I do think from a strategy standpoint, you will probably see a lot more ownership allocated to these later games. There are some higher totals, some more favorable matchups in this one. So definitely keep that in mind. Definitely brings late swap into play. So if you're looking like you're dead after the 1 o'clock games. And maybe as we get into some of these chalkier plays and chalkier games, you might want to pivot off of them. So just something to keep in mind there. But the first one is Miami at Seattle. So obviously, no Tua. It's going to hurt this game. I think this game obviously would have been a pretty exciting one if Tua was playing, but 41.5 is the total. Seattle at home laying 4.5 points. But I think there's still some usable pieces here. Obviously, we're not going to get the huge back and forth that we would like if Tua were there, but you could still make a case for Geno Stacks 5,600 if you want to pair him with Metcalf at 6,300, or Jackson Smith Njigba obviously has looked good last week. Looked great, 5,400 for him. I think is a great price. Lockett is always sneaky. No one's going to play him, and he could outscore those two on any given week. Now, Metcalf and Lockett both have Q tags at the moment, so definitely want to keep an eye on that. If for some reason they can't go, I definitely would expect JSN to be extremely popular at only 5,400. So definitely like him regardless of whether they're in or not. Still don't know whether Ken Walker is going to play. So this is another game where we really got to keep an eye on a lot of things, because if he goes, I think he is a great play against Miami. They have not looked good against the run. Obviously, James Cook destroyed them last week. And then on the Miami side, we got to see if Mostert's going to play, because if he doesn't play, then obviously Achan is to the moon again, 7,000 with the amount of work that we saw him get, especially in the passing game. I definitely think that he is a great play there at 7,000, and maybe with no Tua, it does scare some people off of him. So I do have interest in Achan. Now, Tyreek 8,400. It's a tough price to swallow there. I don't think anybody's going to play him. He's still Tyreek Hill. They will get the ball in his hands. He can break anything at any time. So, in large field stuff, if you wanted to make a case for it, I think it's okay. I don't necessarily know if I'm going to be able to get there, but he is Tyreek Hill. So, unlimited touches, he could still pay off. But overall, probably wouldn't be looking at a game stack here. It would probably just be Geno with one of the wide receivers and be on my way. And if Kenneth Walker plays, I absolutely love him. If he doesn't, maybe take a look at Charbonnet, but he just did not look good at all in really any game where Walker's been out and it's been all him. He hasn't been incredibly efficient. It's been all volume. Now you can make a case that with all the volume against this Miami defense, maybe you should play him, but at 6,000, I don't know. There might be some better plays there if I'm thinking about it. Now, next we have Carolina at Vegas. This is another disgusting game that I'm probably staying away from. It just, there's not a lot of usable pieces. Obviously, with Carolina coming away from Bryce Young, we have Andy Dalton. Maybe that helps the offense a little bit. I do think that people will talk themselves into Deontay Johnson and Adam Thielen. The problem is, which one is it going to be? Could they both just kind of cannibalize each other and eat into each other's workload? So I don't know that there's necessarily upside there. 41 is the total. Vegas favored by 5.5. Really don't love it. I do think potentially a sneaky play could be Zamir White. If there's ever a game where he's going to get a lot of work, this should be it. I do expect them to beat Carolina. Obviously, 5.5 point favorites at home. I'm not alone in that thinking. So if they do get up, maybe you could play the correlation of the Vegas D and Zamir White. So that can make some sense. People will absolutely play Brock Bowers. It looks like his price is just way too low here for what he's actually going to be. And I could definitely see him being up well over $6,000 going forward. So Brock Bowers is definitely in play there. And then I don't know if anybody necessarily chases the Devontae Adams at 7,600, but he's Devontae Adams. Any week he can do what he did last week. He can score 2 touchdowns. So you can make a case. Maybe you play Devontae Adams. He gets an early touchdown, maybe even two. and then you have Zamir White running out the ball the entire second half. So I think you could definitely make a case for some pieces on the Vegas side in this game, but probably wouldn't be looking to stack it overall. And I'm not going to chase the Carolina side. Next is absolutely the game. It's going to be the highest owned on the slate, and for good reason. Has the highest total on the slate. Detroit at Arizona. 52 and a half is the total. The Lions are laying 3 points on the road. So pretty interesting. I do think Detroit is still the better team. Probably should have won last week, but Arizona's look good. I think they're surprising a lot of people, and this game should be pretty interesting. Now, from a DraftKings standpoint, it gets pretty expensive here if you're trying to stack up too many pieces here. I do actually like the golf side quite a bit. He hasn't looked great, but threw for 300 yards last week. I would expect that in a dome against this Arizona defense, he could definitely have a good game. So at 6,500, I do like golf stacks. You could pair him with Amon Rod, 8,200, who had a quad contusion, but seems like he's fine. So Amon Ra, I think, is a great play. You could even pair him with Amon Ra and Jamison Williams. Jamison's 5,800, so it gets a little bit expensive. And then I actually love Sam Laporta this week at 6,000. I think most people paying up will pay on the other side with McBride at 6,200. Obviously, that makes a ton of sense, but I do think Laporta has been involved enough. He's running routes on practically every play. So this is a guy that scored 10 touchdowns last year. I don't think that they're just going to go the entire season and not involve him. So I think he could be a sneaky play for larger field GPPs in a game that should be really popular. You can definitely make a case for him there. And then I think both running backs are in play here. So it's kind of hard if you are going to stack this game. You're going to have to use a good amount of your lineups because there are just so many combinations that you can go to here. It's not very consolidated on the Lion side. I prefer Jameer Gibbs 6,800. He's obviously more expensive than Montgomery. He's involved in the passing game, which I definitely like a little bit more here. But Montgomery at 6,100 should get plenty of work, and obviously he is a goal line threat as well. So on the Arizona side, Kyler Murray 6,900, probably one of the most popular quarterbacks after what we saw last week. Can get there with his legs, can get there through the air. Now, if you're pairing him with Harrison, 7,400, pretty expensive. As I just said, McBride, 6,200. So that kind of scares me a little bit. It's doesn't really work out too great salary wise, especially if you're trying to bring it back with someone from the Lions. So maybe if you wanted to go with a Murray, Harrison, and a Dortch at 4,500, as a salary saver, that can make some sense. Or if you're hoping Michael Wilson scores a touchdown at 4,100, that can make some sense. So there are two cheap guys there that you can throw into your Kyler stacks. That's probably the route I would go if I really wanted to stack this game to get some salary savings. I don't necessarily know if I like Marvin Harrison as a standalone at 7,400. I probably would rather him paired with Kyler because if he's getting there, you would have to think that Kyler is one of the main reasons, and that it's not just Harrison and then no one else is doing anything on this Cardinals offense. James Conner probably going to go overlooked again. 6,600 is a good price for him. Obviously, Detroit is good against the run, but with the amount of work that he gets and the upside he showed so far this year, definitely makes sense. So there's a lot of things that you can do with this game. It's definitely going to be very popular. So keep that in mind. As I was saying, if you stack this game heavily and you're drawing dead after the 1 o'clock or early slate games, then you're going to want to pivot off this one. And I think what could be a good pivot is Baltimore at Dallas. Now, it should be a little bit popular in its own right, but probably nowhere near what Detroit and Arizona is. 48 and a half is the total there. Baltimore, 1.5 point favorites on the road. I get Dallas got stomped last week, but Baltimore just lost to Vegas. So I actually like the Dallas side here at 1.5. I have actually teased them up and San Francisco down. So I got San Francisco to -1, Dallas up to +7.5. I do think Dallas could win this game outright. Baltimore's offensive line is in shambles, and I do think this Dallas pass rush will cause some problems for them. But with that being said, I do still think that Lamar is in play at 7,500. I think he will be the option if anybody's looking to pay up at quarterback. Just offers the upside rushing. I do think because he's going to be under pressure, he's going to have to take off running quite a bit. So definitely like that. His stacking partners are pretty easy. You want Zay Flowers, you want a now under 5K Mark Andrews or Isaiah Likely at 4,700. We saw Lamar was under pressure a lot in at KC, and that was why Likely had such a big game. He was dumping it off to him in the flat, so we could potentially see that quite a bit here with Likely at 4,700. If he's getting some good volume and dump offs, that could work out. But I do like Andrews quite a bit here too at 4,800. I think the Cowboys are strong at corner, but I do think that you could potentially target them in the middle of the field, which is where Andrews will be. So I do like that quite a bit. I'm not playing Derrick Henry 6,500. Just I don't think this is the matchup for it. You want Henry when they're winning. He's playing less than Justice Hill, and if they get behind in this game, he could play only 40% of the snaps, maybe even less. So I'm out on Henry. I do like Dak Stack 6,600. I think makes sense for him. Obviously, you want to pair him with CD Lamb, 8,800. Lamb is a great play by himself. Also, this Baltimore defense has been terrible against the pass. So CD Lamb will most likely be my highest owned wide receiver this week. I'm expecting a monster game from him. Obviously, just shy of $9,000 is pretty expensive, and he's going to have a huge game to pay that off. But I definitely expect it to come there. Now, if you didn't want to go with CD and you wanted to go Dak with Brandon Cooks or a Tolbert, I think that makes sense. Tolbert had a pretty now, obviously, they were down most of the game, so they had to throw the ball quite a bit. So maybe Tolbert's targets were a bit inflated last week, but you can make a case for it there at 3,800. And then definitely want to keep an eye on Ferguson because if he's good to go at only 4,500, I think that's a great piece to pair with Dak. And then Schoonmaker, 3,300 didn't really pay off last week. I played a lot of them, but if you're getting 10 points for a $3,300 tight end with the way the tight end has been this year, you could do worse. But as I said last week, that would only be in Dak stacks for me. So I don't know. I don't know if you necessarily want to completely overstack this game, but there are definitely pieces here that you could use if you wanted to just go Lamar naked and CD Lamb and be on your way. I think that makes sense. Lamar and one of his tight ends and CD, that can make some sense. I'm staying away from the Dallas backfield. It's just a mess. You don't know who it's going to be. If I was going with Dak stacks and looking to bring it back with someone on the Baltimore side, it would most likely be Zay Flowers or Mark Andrews for me. You could take a chance on Likely. I do think that we're going to be playing a little bit of roulette between the two of them over the year, but I lean a little bit towards the Andrews side. Last game that we have on the slate, this one, there's some pieces here that you could use, but we have San Francisco at the Rams. 43 is the total here. 7-point favorites on the road are the 49ers. Obviously, I said it. We were doing the Jets season preview. I think the Jets play the Rams week 17 or 16. And I said, oh, that's a Jets win because by this point, there won't even be any Rams left. They're all going to be hurt. Well, it didn't take very long for that to come to fruition because this offensive line is decimated. Obviously, there is no Cooper Kupp. There is no Puka Nakua. It is a disaster. So, from a Rams standpoint, you can make a case for Kyron Williams, but if he's literally their whole offense against this 49ers front, I don't know. It's a little bit scary because I could see them involving Corum as the year goes on a little bit more. Ronnie Rivers has been the backup to this point, but if Kyron's not getting the volume, that does scare me a little bit, and I'm worried about him regardless against this 49er defense. The real question here would be which of the Rams wide receivers do you want to go after? The answer could be none. It could just be stay away from the Rams altogether, but they are cheap. So Demarcus Robinson, 5,000, Tyler Johnson, 4,700, Jordan Whittington, 4,200. They all are cheap and should be involved. Robinson, probably a little bit more of a deep play guy, and with the trouble with the offensive line, maybe that scares me a little bit. So maybe you go to Whittington, who should play the cup role and be in the slot, maybe some shorter targets. So could probably make a case there. He would probably be my favorite, but Tyler Johnson has been on the field a ton. So 4,700, you can make a case there. I don't know how many of these guys I really want to chase. I might just play a couple 49ers and be on my way and not bring it back at all. I think Purdy stacks are interesting here, and the fact that there is no Debo makes it very consolidated. Ayuk's only 6,200. So I think Purdy to Ayuk makes a ton of sense. If you wanted to do Purdy, Ayuk, and Kittle, 5,700 for Kittle's probably a little bit too cheap also. So that's not a terrible stack here. And they could definitely, we saw Kyler tear this defense apart last week. If Purdy just they get up big there, you could be on your way. And then I expect Mason to be one of the highest owned players again on the slate, 6,200. Probably still too cheap for how much work he's been getting. Definitely should get 20 carries again in this one. His rushing total is 89 and a half yards already. So definitely expecting him to get work. 6,200 makes a lot of sense there. But keep in mind the ownership. I think if you wanted to pair him with maybe an Ayuk and say that they just throttle the Rams here and just go that way, or even if you wanted to involve him in Purdy stacks, that's probably really different. I don't think a lot of people will do that. A lot of people will probably, if they are playing Purdy stacks, just play it without Mason and say, oh, that's getting me different off of Mason lineups. So you go Purdy to Kittle and Mason. So Mason's not going to catch a lot of passes, but if Purdy throws 2 touchdowns to Kittle and then Mason's running out the ball in the second half and scores a touchdown himself, that's a great stack there. Or you can make the same case with a Purdy to Ayuk. I do like Ayuk quite a bit. I will be playing him just as a standalone in this game, and I do think that makes quite a bit of sense. With no Debo here, I definitely think that they try and get him involved, and obviously sitting out all the preseason, he's not really been up to 100%, but it should be ramping up more and more as the season goes on. So I do like him there. But that's going to do it for this week. We've gone through every single game, but I do want to touch there quickly. Just the guys not playing in the preseason, it's obviously hurting things here because it's literally hurting people. I think that everybody's bodies are not up to game speed. We're seeing a lot of soft tissue injuries, and it's definitely affecting things. And then it's affecting the play as well. You can't come out here and go full throttle and be clicking on all cylinders when you haven't played any games at all. And we've seen it. The scoring is down, especially from a passing standpoint and passing touchdowns. So these first 2-3 games basically have been glorified preseason games. Now, hopefully it can pick up here in week 3 and we get a little bit better of a product, but I do think that it's a trend that we have to keep in mind, and until we see otherwise, maybe plan accordingly. But that's going to do it for this week. As always, thank you for listening. Quick announcement, just I've been doing the newsletter on Thursdays and Sundays. Unfortunately, my wife has been working and I have the kids pretty much all Thursday and Sunday, so it's very difficult to get the newsletter out. So for the time being, basically everything's just going to be out in my articles. I have the showdown article up already, so definitely check that out at thehelmsports.com. I will have my fate of the slate, everything that you need to know for DFS out on Saturday, and maybe I'll just try and update that Sunday with some of my core plays and maybe some updated ownership rather than the newsletter. Now, I will say that you can actually, thehelmsports.com, you can sign up for emails where it will email my articles to you as soon as they are published. So you can do that as well. Everything right to your inbox. But check out thehelmsports.com, check out yardsperfantasy.com, and the madlabmma.com. All my stuff is on those three sites. Obviously, my bets go into the Mad Lab MMA Discord the second that I make them, so you get the same line that I do. But that's going to do it for this week. As always, thank you for listening. I'm your host, Derek Helm, and remember,
Just have fun out there.